1 year after the great success of Dishonored 2, there was no DLC. Dishonored 1 was seen as a huge success, and there were still plot points left open. There were 3 DLCs for that game, 2 plot-related ones, and 1 that was just a for funsies challenge. So where was Dishonored 2's? Well, in 2017, we got what was planned to be the DLC released as a standalone title, placing us in the shoes of one of the all-star characters from the first DLCs, and voiced by Rosario Dawson herself. This is Dishonored: Death of the Outsider. Greetings gamers, welcome to another episode of The List, and today we are talking about wrapping up the Kaldwin saga. For the first time in the franchise, we are not in the shoes of a member of the family. Neither Emily nor Corvo make an appearance in this title. Instead, we take the role of Billy Lurk, one of my and the studio's favorite narrative characters. Death of the Outsider received high praise from critics, but was also rated as very short compared to the other entries of the series. And seeing as how my script is about half the length of the other Dishonored games, I'm inclined to agree. Death of the Outsider was nominated for many awards, and won the Ping Award for Best PC Game. Despite its lack of length, it's still a very deep title. Lots of new missions, powers, and so much lore to explore as the ending to the Kaldwin story arc. There are a few key differences that I think should be addressed before we start the story. Chaos, the system where the game decides how much destruction you have been causing, is notably absent from this title. Likewise, mana potions have been removed, favoring instead a mana pool that regenerates back up to full. There are other minute differences, but those can be explored as we go. As usual with games like this, let's dive in with the story. We start with the illustrated cutscenes we have come to expect from the Dishonored franchise. Here we get an introduction to Billy and her story across the previous 2 games and her current goals. Right now, that is to find Dowd, the person who was her mentor and savior many years prior. When she had last seen the man, he had let her live after she betrayed him to Delilah. Our goal right now is to find our previous master and get his help. We enter Billy's point of view as she recounts a recurring dream she has had where pain radiates from her arm and eye, and persists for hours after waking. If you've seen the cover of this game, this will be very telling that something is going to happen. And if you've played Dishonored 2, you'd know that Megan has previously been missing those 2 exact things. Next, we see her grab a heart and an assassin's blade before she tells us where we are going, the boxing club. A nearby table lets us purchase some bounties, which will award us with gold upon completion of side objectives in the area. You don't really find NPCs that gives you quests in this game, you just kind of buy them before the mission starts. We are currently on the Dreadful Whale, the ship that Emily departed from at the end of Dishonored 2, and the one Billy has been using for years while masquerading as Megan Foster. Poking around gives us a little bit of context as to when we are in the timeline and what Billy has been doing. Apparently at some point she had a friend or lover named Daedra who gave her this heart we currently have. There's also a letter exchange between Megan and Emily, means that this takes place sometime after the events of Dishonored 2. Long enough for Emily to start solidifying her power and start correcting problems of the Empire. As we leave the ship, we learn of another of this game's interesting new mechanics, Rat Whispers. Where the heart from the previous game let us see into the minds and pasts of people, the heart in this game lets us listen to what rats have to say. They call us a friend in a creepy way, informing the player that Megan fed the friends when they needed it, and are willing to tell us things if we ask them. Thanks, rodent buddies. We head up to the nearby carriage, which we activate to take us closer to our objective. We get a quick tutorial as we progress through the streets about the basic mechanics of stealth. This is, again, very standard fare for us at this point, because we've played the other 2 games. The path between us and the boxing ring is relatively short. There's 1 guard in the first street and 2 in this little canal on patrol. Taking them out lets us continue relatively unabated. You can just barely see the window above open, making it a viable path. This leads us to a currently abandoned apartment with some basic loot and a safe without an obvious combination nearby. You could also try the staircase, which leads to the same street, or try your hand at sneaking past all the slumbering creatures. All paths eventually lead to the same place. The fight building is also a bathhouse. It is guarded and run by people called the Eyeless, a large gang with a wide reach of power. Upon entering, there is a locked door we cannot access. The nearby woman, however, offers us 100 coins to open it for us. For now, it's better to take a look around. None of the nearby people are immediately hostile towards us unless we attack them or go somewhere we aren't supposed to go, so it pays to have a look. At the bottom of the stairs is the fighting area. The fights have not started yet, so it's pretty calm. Eyeless train, the vendors are getting set up, Dowd is trapped underground with what looks like a magical suppression field, and that last part seems to be the most important. Our goal then becomes getting our friend out of here. The device's controls are currently locked, meaning we need to find some key to get this open. A few of the Eyeless talk to each other about how the challenger in the middle is set to fight Dowd, and they call him the Black Magic Brute. Poking around and picking a few pockets nearby doesn't get us the key we need though, although we do find a note cluing us off toward the combination of the safe we were talking about earlier. Well, with no key on this floor, I think it's time to change our inspection methods towards the more clandestine. Going back to the Eyeless at the front, we can pay her off to let us into the side door. Funny thing, knocking out the guards immediately on the inside and then luring this one inside to knock her out lets us refund the money. Net win all the way around. The second floor is pretty abandoned other than a few of the eyeless going about their tasks. There's a bunch of plague spirit nearby and coincidentally the object of one of our side bounties. The formula for the brew is also in a drawer. Don't worry about the actual ingredients, I'm sure they don't use a live bull rat, it's figurative. We have to destroy the current stores of liquor in order for our bonus paycheck. The back rooms of the second floor are the ones that are the most interesting. Here is the leader, a woman who presumably has our key and a nearby lackey. Taking them out, we pretty much have free reign of the upstairs areas. We collect some money, tools, grab our key, and then have one last bounty to deal with. Inside the back room, there is a dog cage. Unfortunately, the white dog is owned by the sender of our bounty. With no way to break the dog out, they want us to at least put it out of its misery, rather than let it be ripped apart in the fighting pits. It's a difficult situation, but we take out all the dogs, and then can take the white one to a nearby furnace to complete the solemn quest. Honestly, this one hurts on a personal level. Nothing left to do in the upstairs, so it's time to ruin the fights down below. No one really tries to stop us from unlocking the box and pulling the lever, so that's exactly what we do. The chaos then starts immediately. The eyeless justifiably are terrified and try to run. Dowd does not let them, and wastes no time flexing his abilities. He cleared the room in a burst of violent power, then the reunion between master and student can finally happen. They talk about what drew them together in a really heartfelt way, and Dowd reveals that he has been planning one last job and wants to kill, as he says,
"We're gonna kill the black-eyed bastard himself."
With that, he makes an escape heading back to the ship. It's time for us to do the same. Well, of course, it's a very convenient time for the local guards to attack, slaughtering the remaining eyeless, and then looking for any potential survivors, aka us. Either sleuthing or kicking our way through, we need to backtrack towards the whale. On the way, it behooves us to stop by that apartment and do some safe cracking. The note hinted us that the books on the shelf will be our clue to the combination. This took a second to figure out, but basically what we need to do is look at the number of books above the desk, and that correlates to the number we need to press on the safe. We nab the rewards and make a quick break for the carriage, incapacitating the few guards that filled in behind the squad that assaulted the bathhouse. That's it really. Once we get to the carriage, the mission ends, and we get our post-mission screen in the same style as Dishonored 2. The first level is relatively short and straightforward, but it does serve a good purpose of getting us accustomed to some of the new things in the game. Something interesting about this mission to me is we don't have any outsider abilities or powers. This is a lot like Dishonored 2, which didn't give us powers until after the first mission. It's a good introduction, letting us play with the systems before we get to break them with magic. There's not a whole lot to say about the complexity of this level because it really isn't. Super short, let's move on to Mission 2. Mission 2's illustrated cutscene gives us some background for how Billy met Dowd. Apparently, she witnessed him kill 3 miscreants as a child and followed him. As a consequence, he trained her with his abilities. The man she knows is not the same Dowd. The one we have now is older, more contemplative, and not as strong physically. Billy then discusses the ideas of the Abbey, who agrees with Dowd that the Overseer is the source of all evil. Ironic, really, that the Abbey has hated us basically for all 3 games, and now we're on their side. Or this, anyway. As Billy is discussing the killing of the very man, the outsider shows up. He offers to give us something we lost, that being Megan's missing eye and arm. See, back in Dishonored 2, Megan was missing those things until Emily went back in time to deal with Stilton, giving her her arm and eye back. The outsider naturally can see through this veil, and while Billy is naturally confused, we the player know why these specific parts were chosen. The dreams and pains Billy were having were a way, like the timepiece, to peel back the curtain of reality and see what was. As for why the outsider took these parts and replaced them with these weird magic things, I'm not so sure. He isn't really helping us per se. The outsider really likes to meddle in reality. Giving Billy these items will do just that. Whatever his motivations end up being, with this new arm and this new eye, Billy has access to a host of new powers. Let's touch on them super fast because there's only 3 in this game. Displace is this game's movement ability, but that's where the similarities to Blink end. The ability works by placing a shadowy version of yourself some distance away, and then activating the ability again will send you to that shadow. There are no upgrades, as the game gives you all abilities unlocked without the need for runes, letting you play in a sandbox style. Foresight is your intel gathering ability. It stops time for you, but lets you float around in a sort of astral projection sort of thing. This lets you scout ahead, around corners, or above you safely. Semblance lets you steal somebody's face. Literally. Borrowing an NPC's face takes some time though, and will steadily drain mana from your pool as you walk around with your new look. With our 3 new powers and fashion change, we are ready to move around the whale. And we explain that we are quite confused. Dowd does warn us that the outsider's powers always have a price. Seems that ours almost cost an arm and a leg, eh?
Oh, brother, this guy stinks!
Well, while we have a new suit of powers, his powers are fading and he's actually growing weaker. Despite this, he does have a solid lead on how to actually kill the outsider. We need to find the knife that originally made him. He then explains that our first step is going to be to learn more from the eyeless. Dowd overheard from the fight pits that there is a place nearby called the Red Camellia. This place does tattoos that would get us access to eyeless installations. We agree to go there and tell Dowd to rest. Poor man. He is one of my favorite characters, and seeing him grow weak actually makes me feel sorry for him. We then do as the mission suggests and follow the ink. We again use the nearby carriage to get to our target location. It drops us near the street we need, and we can already tell from this area it's going to be much more large and open compared to the previous level. Of particular note, if you go to the right after spawning, you'll see some old friends I have from the Dishonored 2 video. I had to replay the game for you too. The tattoo parlor is not far away. We can incapacitate the person on the front desk and then head into the back. Billy then gives herself the tattoo, allowing us access to places the eyeless previously had locked. A quick stop to the appointment book in the back also lets us see what other people have got tattoos, including some VIPs that clue us into who we need to talk to next. This puts us on the path of Sean Yun, a famous singer, and Ivan Jacoby, a city administrator. A third leader is also mentioned, but no name is given. The order with which we go after the targets doesn't particularly matter. Of particular note though, stopping by the black market shop lets us get all of our side bounties for this level. So as you see the visual nightmare that is all the quest markers on my screen, just know that that's why. There are 4 total side jobs. We need to kidnap a bartender inside the Spectre Club, make a mime look like he killed himself, stop workplace harassment at a bank, and rescue someone's brother who went missing. Well, first on our long list of objectives, let's take our new tattoo and get into that exclusive club called the Spectre. Showing the doorman our tattoo, he replies that our line work was subpar, but unlocks the door regardless. The inside seems to be just a normal upscale bar. The floors and walls are clean and decorated with affluent paintings and the like. The eyeless bartender tells us of all the specials, including one called the Sanguine Infusion in the private lounge upstairs. We can't book that one, but no one is stopping us from taking a look. Those that are performing the infusion are all hooked up to what looks like IV stations. It isn't hard to guess what the Sanguine Infusion actually is. Turns out, one of the bounties we have is to help this poor man hooked up to be tonight's vintage. KOing the guard in the room, we can stop our poor man Alberto's death by reversing the flow. I won't pretend to understand the problems with blood types that will be happening here, but for now we've saved the poor man and knocked out all 4 members inside their chairs. This sets their bodyguards on high alert, and we need to remove her in order to start extricating Alberto. With the upstairs clear, there is now the problem of removing the eyewitnesses from the ground floor. This painstaking process involves the use of many electrical shock bolts, but eventually the entirety of the Spectre lies still. This makes a very safe place for us to avoid prying eyes and complete some of those objective markers. Alberto we can carry from the club and take down to the less public side of the street where his brother has a safe house set up. Although, I have a few questions for his brother. Yeah, okay, let's try that one more time. Gingerly setting Alberto in the safe house his brother set up for us, we have an objective down. The bartender also has a place his unconscious body needs to be. We take him to a nearby rooftop by displacing our way over the short path, and now he's where he needs to be. Clearing the club is really paying dividends. Another quick one to get out of the way is the mime. The mime is working on the street past the guard checkpoint and is doing his best to remain perfectly still. But if we persistently bother him, he will get progressively more and more annoyed. Especially if we blatantly rob him, he will run away into the nearby alley. All we need to do then is take him somewhere where it will look like he just jumped off. We send him over the cliff, and quest complete. Poor guy. Must have ruined a kid's birthday party or something. With most of our side objectives done, let's make use of the fact that we have access to the Spectre Club to get into Sean Yun's house. There is a conjoining bridge on the top floor between the house and the club. This lets us circumvent the door guard outside of the house. We get let out into a little storage area on the upper floors, without anyone immediately next to us. The estate itself, though, is heavily guarded by soldiers, many of them elites, and a myriad of maids and butlers. Listening in, we can hear that guards have turned on a section of the house's electrified floor as well, meaning that if we venture that way, we need to be extra careful. Getting through this area without being seen is difficult. Painstakingly sticking to the shadows, you can eventually set up a way to incapacitate more guards on the second floor, making movement much easier. There are a few rooms with very important things for us. Inside the room with the electric floor, there's a series of display cases. The one in the center looks to have something collectible in it for us. I know there must be a way to turn this floor off, but not only am I stubborn, there's an achievement for collecting this without shutting off the power. So, one crossbow bolt to break the glass, we can jump and grab the items before displacing away. Golden punch card acquired. Its use is not immediately obvious though, but it's nice that we have it. As we grow closer to Sean, we can hear his muffled voice. His personal room is on the 3rd floor, protected by some more personal guards. Neutralizing them gives us almost unrequited access to the whole estate. Yun is in his room, coughing his way through song practice. Neutralizing him is a simple matter, but now we need access to that vault. His vault is voice locked. Borrowing his face with semblance does give us an achievement, but unfortunately does not fool the machine. However, we did get a golden song sheet downstairs, so playing the song unlocks the safe and letter with more clues. It appears the knife is located in a bank vault. 2 keys are required for entry. Shun only has 1 of them, so it looks like we need to find that second one on our man Jacoby. After nabbing more collectibles from the estate, our business here is done and we can focus on other targets. Going after our last side objective, the Racketeer bounty, has us going up to the bank. It seems the person in question is accosting one of the tellers as we speak, threatening the teller's life and their poor cat named Agatha. Now, I don't mind threatening people, but I draw the line at threatening pets, so this person definitely needs to die. Unfortunately, we cannot do that now, as we have to follow the offender until we find their accomplice. Sticking to the roof and pole tops, we can eventually find the Racketeer has 1 additional person to help them outside, and they meet at the Spectre's club. Our objective then changes to kill them both, which from our vantage point is easy enough. This leaves us with one last objective, going after Ivan. His office is some distance away, but unfortunately he's not in at the moment. A note on the door tells us that he's in a plaza nearby getting ready for a public address that he has to make later. The plaza is a street away, past a small guard checkpoint. He is protected by a multitude of guards as he stands on the stage at the plaza's center. A head-on attack, while possible, is definitely not advisable. Some exploration and poking around takes us to the tunnels on the left. Neutralizing the guard down there lets us creatively take Ivan down. Literally, pulling the lever lets him fall through the stage, unconscious as he impacts the floor. Grabbing the key from his person, we can make our escape and return to his office. On the desk of his ornate office is a note giving us more details as well as the second key for the vault. That's it for our objectives. To extract, we need only get back to the carriage, which will in turn give us our post-mission report. This level does a lot for being a second mission. The play space is quite large, with a lot of open Karnaca streets to explore, and plenty of small areas like apartments, stores, and cubbies. With the last area being dark and in a sleazy side street boxing arena, seeing the alive streets of Karnaca again is a great tonal change. Much like Dishonored 2 when we first reached the second mission. The bounties continue to impress with their fun and well thought out objectives. I wish I had more narrative reasons to why I had to kill a mime, but my headcanon of him ruining someone's birthday party is just fine for me. As far as the story goes, I have some questions. The outsider portion at the beginning of the level definitely felt a little rushed, and while I'm sure we are supposed to be asking why the outsider gave Billy powers, it feels too convenient. Orvo was gifted powers after he escaped prison and already had his goal. Emily was out to save her family. Billy did save her old master, yes, but something about how quickly he showed up, gave her powers, and then ran away strikes me as odd. Billy also seems to accept the fact that her arm and eye just got removed a little too quickly for me. I know that this is a meta nod to Emily shifting the timeline in the previous game, but it still felt a little flat. I will say though, I do like getting all of our abilities at once. Not needing to get runes while diminishing the make a build part of the previous game is nice, because it makes the game feel more like an open sandbox and less like an RPG. There's no feeling of not picking the right ability or worrying if you will have enough upgrade points to get that power right when you need it. The mana system is also something that changed, and I really like it. There are 3 mana bars. Each power will cost a bar or steadily drain for the duration. The bars will then slowly regenerate, removing the need for mana potions entirely. This does mean you cannot simply do ridiculous displays of power where you chug potions and unleash a ton of magic, but it does make magic feel more consistent and easier to use. Part of my problem with the previous games is feeling like I needed to space my magic use out and wait for regeneration, or feeling like I would at some point run out of magic. This led to me basically never using mana pots and probably not using as much magic as I could or should have. This game doesn't have that problem. And again, I love the diverse level environment, and receiving all the powers at once makes it a more relaxed sandboxy feel. Great second level, introduces us to so many things that make Death of the Outsider unique compared to the other 2 games. Let's go rob a bank. Our cutscene explains some of Billy's past as an apprentice of Dowd and her previous experiences with the Void. She echoes my sentiment that we do not understand the Outsider's motivations at all to this point. She then discusses the meaning of corruption and explains that the Eyeless is peddling these same black magics. Billy muses that the outsider probably knows what Billy wants, but we aren't sure if he knows what we plan to do with it. We give Daedra a sweet nod after writing in our log and are ready to rob a bank. Dowd rests on top of the whale in a posh-looking chair and helps us go over our information. We start with the basics, such as the apparent impregnability of the bank and our 3 possible entry points. These being the roof, the trash, and the sewers. Once we enter the vault itself, our target will likely be the location of the knife. Inside, there will be traps, clockwork soldiers, and a ton of general security. Dowd has one of the best suggestions I've ever had in a video game. He proposes that we find an absolute ton of drugs and use it to knock out everyone in the bank. This will in turn let us find the manager's key and basically have unrequited access to the entire building. He applauds our planning and entrusts us to finish this quest. We leave him behind for now and take the carriage downtown. The play space for this level is exactly the same as the previous one as far as exterior cells. The changes are in time of day, number and placement of guards, and the interior spaces. For now, we are on the streets we are familiar with. Stopping by the black market shop lets us pick up side objectives, some of which are located in the bank, so not immediately accomplishable, but the others are located outside. That lets us complete them before we make our play for the bank. One such objective needs us to get into a nearby locked boat and retrieve a painting. It is currently trying to be accessed by some workers. Removing them from the equation lets us find that it is indeed locked. Lucky for us, the boatman is not too far away. Taking the key he doesn't need lets us in for our objective. It is a returning all-star from Dishonored 2, one of the best modern art pieces in all of history. It's a nice little nod to the double being absolutely terrible at art. Also, canonically, Emily saved the double, meaning that this art, while rare now, could be a commodity in the years to come. Anyway, after adding Art Thief to our resume, we head toward our lead on laudanum. The drugstore in town seems to have gone out of business. But we do have the location of someone who used to run the place. This sees us slinking over apartments until we meet this fine lady. She assumes the bank sent us after her. Her father is the one that ran the drugstore, but unfortunately no longer. She lets on that the bank is selling his stock at a nearby auction. We agree to go be a buyer for this lot. The auction is taking place back at the stage area, and at the woman's insistence, we change our look. However, instead of simply wearing a hat, we put on an entirely new face. We take this time to sit in the auction, lest our mana pool drain. The auction goes as we expect. Occasionally someone would try to outbid us, but once we prove to have bigger pockets, or at least too big for these people, we take the painting, the poppy tincture, and a promise to recoup our losses at the bank. With that, we have our laudanum and can slip away, no one the wiser. Another contract we can complete outside is easy enough. Pickpocketing a specific guard without him knowing that we were there. Displacing ourselves nearby, slipping in, and displacing out makes this one easy. Not a whole lot to really talk about here. With all of that, it's time for our infiltration. Of the ways to get in, if you are like me and going for all the achievements, you need to not alert or kill any of the bank's inhabitants, which means the laudanum play is the best bet. Powering the lift to the roof lets us take out the 2 guards and drop our chemical surprise into the air duct. Heading inside the bank, we get some really sleuthy music and get to work on our next 3 objectives. Find the vault, copy down a ledger page, rip into a specific vault. Sounds easy enough. Here's the catch. Even though everyone is asleep, their bodies are still in the way, and no matter how much laudanum we use, clockwork soldiers will still be on the prowl. I won't be going over every inch of this place as there's a ton to explore, and it's worth doing by yourself, and if you're like me, failing several times. After a while, we will reach the front counters and start opening some doors that will allow us deeper access to the bank. Weaving through static defenses and clockwork people, we get near the vault. Funny enough, there's also a letter here talking about one of our very good friends. It appears that after several incredibly unfortunate robberies, one Dr. Galvani has taken to using one of the bank's strongboxes. Unfortunately for him, he's using a combination attached to a very important date in his life. Oh, how interesting. Pocketing that information for now, we can head upstairs and ring someone on the other side of the room to let us in. This is important. Remember that we talked to the security guard here. Anyway, deactivating the wall of light by taking out the whale oil lets us slip upstairs. This lets us into Dolores, the bank manager's office, to rob both her of her valuables and the key that she has on the wall. In addition, this lets us copy a certain ledger from her book, completing one of our contracts. Prodding some more, we learn that Eyeless documents are sent to the Royal Conservatory. It seems that that will be one of our next targets. Taking the elevator to the bottom, we are let off near some safe boxes, as well as a clockwork soldier and a floor filled with a few thousand volts. Here we can steal from the various lockboxes if we can decipher the codes. Fortunately for us, Galvani is up to the same stuff he was in the previous games, and here we can also steal a gemstone for our contracts. Returning back to the main floor, we can defuse the electrical floor and then make our way to a control room. Here we can then move the vault. Not an elevator that gets us to the vault, we can physically move the vault to another floor, either the director's office or the archives. However, we don't have to do either of those. See, going back to the elevator, we can slip around on top and land in the maintenance area. Up here, with some quick displacing to avoid death shocks from these dumb Teslas, we can get on top of the vault and then use levers to release the vault from its fastenings. This lets us ride the falling vault all the way down as it breaks through the floor and lets us out into the sewers. Not sure if any of you are Destiny fans, but it makes me feel like this. Here we can open all of the vault doors, some with the code sequence we learned, which will yield us money and resources, and then the central one, which requires the 2 keys. Inside we see the item we have been searching for and can equip the knife. Reaching for it brings us again into the void, where the outsider shows us our fancy new weapon. He explains 4,000 years ago this knife cut his name away. He then comments that we have experienced very similar things. He then gives us the knife, telling us that he knows we'll be looking for holes in the world and the void. But he also tells us that he knows Dowd is now dead, and our general fate is to find him in the void. He calls us different, then he leaves. Again, leaving us with far more questions than we have answers for. We ask ourselves if Dowd is really gone, and with knife in hand, we make our escape before the noise of the vault draws any more attention. From here, it's a matter of displacing ourselves back to the carriage and making our escape. Now, for plot and ambiance, this level is absolutely amazing compared to the previous ones. It really feels like a movie-level heist as you explore more and more of the bank without waking a single soul. There is one problem with this level though, small one. I was going for the achievement Perfect Crime without a guide. I figured it couldn't be that hard. Well, I was wrong. See, I made a few mistakes. Let's go over the requirements and what went wrong here. The achievement reads as follows: empty the vault without tampering with any security systems, leaving everyone unharmed and asleep. Yeah, I kind of forgot the first part. See, removing whale oil counts as tampering with security. Also, I feel like talking to the security guard counts as waking somebody up. So yeah, no achievement for now. However, I feel like in going for that achievement, I had some of the most fun. It forced me to look around the place, which is where the bank shines as a mission. Reusing the past area gives us the feeling of casing a joint before doing a job, and overall I think this might be one of the shining stars for me in this game. Not that the next 2 levels aren't good, but playing through this one blind was one of my favorites. Unfortunately, the outsider, as strange as he is not a liar. Dowd has indeed passed away while we were doing the bank job. Billy laments that no matter how many people wanted him dead, at the end of the day, it was only time that did it. Billy sets the whale ablaze as his funeral pyre, marking not only the end to Dowd, but the end to Megan, as she will no longer run and hide. She will finish what Dowd started. Billy awakes and goes over her known information. It appears that the Abbey is indeed still obsessed with the void, and while the curator is dead, whatever he has set in motion at the Royal Conservatory, we need to get involved in. In Dishonored 2, the conservatory was controlled by the Coven. Now it's taken over by the Abbey. We need to find out what's inside. An audiograph nearby has the final message of Dowd to Billy, where he goes over a little bit of his and Billy's history. He then goes on to explain that while we are the best he has ever taught, our betrayal was expected, and it's only fair that sparing us, way back in Dishonored 1, is what is going to let us be the person that finally gets to kill the outsider. He thanks Billy for giving his last days something positive after a life fraught with death, and then finally signs off. We emerge into the daylight from the apartment we have been gathering information from, and set ourselves upon entering the conservatory. Outside now, the Abbey is burning what's left over from the Coven. Lucky for us, they're cataloging everything that's being burned in a list outside. Reading it lets us know that there are some documents in the curator's office that might be of some note to us. There are a few bonus objectives for us. Nearby, we can find a woman who explains that she has a friend that is supposed to have returned from a nearby apartment job. We agree to go after him, as it's only a short displaced jump for us to the balcony. Unfortunately, her friend is already dead. We pick up the note as the Abbey members knock on the door. Eventually, they knock it down with high-powered pistols and let themselves in. Removing them, we can deliver the last letter of Lonnie, and she will award us for the trouble with a charm and some cash. There's a few more things to do outside. Notably, in the apartment 1 floor up and across from where we just were, is something I can only describe as a room from the Mission Impossible franchise. There are tripwires everywhere. Failure to avoid them, well, it's about what you expect. There's something in this room of great value, but for now let's ditch the death trap and head to the black market at the far end of the street. The proprietor is surprised to see us, as the entrance on our side was boarded up. From here, we load up on the usual munitions and upgrades, as well as pick up our set of contracts. This time they are stealing a book of prophecies from the lead sister, recovering a relic from a nearby apartment that is, quote, very well protected, i.e. the apartment we've already found, and a contract that has us kill literally everyone in the conservatory except for one guy who needs to be put in a torture chair. Somebody's got a grudge here. Objective in hand, let's start checking things off our list. Closest and easiest at the moment is that apartment. Dodging, or well, triggering the wires, lets us have access to everything in the room. Pretty straightforward contract. I think the devs took pity on us because the other ones in this level are much more involved. Everything else we have to do is within the conservatory, so here we go. The layout is very similar to Dishonored 2, but more walls and floors preventing us from blinking between the floors. It forces us to play much slower, especially as we have to painstakingly clear each and every room of combatants before making it to the next one for our contract. However, this doesn't ruin the flow too much. This floor plan makes the map feel more claustrophobic and require more intentional movement and ability usage to traverse, which is a good change. On the top floor are our two main targets, Sister Roswin and Brother Cardoza. Here, there is a quick way to get the artifact we need. It's to borrow Cardoza's face and simply pick up the item from Sister Roswin. This prevents the conflict. We do, however, still need to kill everyone except for Cardoza, so sorry, sister. We now make our way downward, carting Brother Cardoza's unconscious body with us, systematically removing the Abbey floor by floor. We take a side trip to the Silvergraph projector and learn that there is a point on the map in the mountains where there should be nothing, someplace up in the north. This is where the eyeless are accessing the void, and it also gives us our next marker. We steal the nearby prophecies from the rundown elevator and then make our way toward our final objective. We deposit Cardoza into the chair once everybody else is dead and continue with our day. With the lovely destruction of absolute chaos out of the way, we can continue our hunt for the Overseer and make our way back to the apartment nearby to plan our mountain vacation. This is a significantly smaller level compared to the others for a few reasons. First of all, the map is a rehash from the previous game, bringing the number of maps that are repeated so far to 2, with the second and third mission of this game having the same exterior cell, and this being straight from Dishonored 2. Familiarity makes this much easier than finding things out on the fly. And second, while it is a familiar map, the objectives are rather simple. No real puzzling like there was at the bank job, and no sleuthing around like the first map. The contracts here are quite frankly hilarious. From dealing with an absolutely jacked up apartment to somebody paying us to basically wipe out an entire sect of the Abbey, the side content here is really what makes this level great. Ridiculous, but I think Dishonored is sometimes at its best when it doesn't take itself seriously. This level doesn't. I will say the main quest here is lacking. All we do here is learn where we need to go next. It's kind of just an interim level. I feel like the game could have just told us to go to the mountains from the bank and the narrative wouldn't suffer at all. Not the strongest level in my book, but not the weakest. Off to the mountains we go. Our illustrated cutscene this time shows us Billy contemplating the darkness. Not only the void, but the internal darkness as well. She goes on to say that she means to continue Dowd's work, and while this has been the strangest time in her life, she will see it through. Up near the peaks, there is a mining complex that people don't believe should exist. The cult lives there, doing something with the void. This is our ticket to see the outsider. Billy contemplates what will happen if the outsider leaves, and, well, I guess it's time to find out. We awake from a resting spot nearby and are met immediately by our best friend. The outsider goes on to explain that the area here is the closest our reality can get to the void without crossing over. He then agrees that whatever we do here will indeed change the world. He almost seems to be taunting us, daring us to go through with Dowd's request. We ask him why he's even bothering to talk to us now, and he goes on to explain that his cultists are never satisfied no matter what he gives them. Their minds are now poisoned, and they themselves hide the ritual that made him who he is. He then goes on to say that in order to die, he needs to find his name. We pressure him for any more information, and he is cryptic at best. He leaves us with our choice and then departs. Wow, thanks, Mr. Outsider. The mines themselves are lightly guarded at first. A few dogs, a few stray guards, all more concerned with killing each other than stopping us. The decor is as you would expect from an abandoned mine. Carts lie around rusted fences in disrepair, buildings built into the very rock walls. Using some nearby corpses to help us weigh down the elevator, we rise to the mine interior. We don't have to go far before we see 3 members of the cult watching as a envisioned crosses. This is a new enemy type for us, and while it is possible to kill them with some magic and our newly acquired super dagger, if they catch you unaware, you will die. The nearby cultists mention that Envisioned can't communicate with them anymore, implying that these are people who have undergone some sort of transfiguration or transformation. Pushing further in, we can see with our magic that there are an absolute ton of cultists, in addition to a very large presence far away. It's causing pain to Billy as well. Here we can hear tidbits of some of the cultists, having held another one down, one who was going crazy. Well, more crazy than the rest of them. His room is nearby, but locked. Eventually, we come to what I can only describe as a subterranean library, complete with projectors, comfy chairs, and chandeliers. There are, as previous areas, an absolute huge amount of people around here, making pushing through them rather difficult. Once through the library, we reach 2 more cultists contemplating life and the outsider. From here, we basically have a straight shot to that massive presence we talked about earlier. It's part of a huge statue, and the energy is coming from an eye, the eye of the dead god. Inspecting it closer, we can see that it is still looking. Touching it, we can draw the power into ourselves, which removes the glow from the eye and throws us into the void. From here, we have to backtrack through the caves inside the void. If we find the key to Malachi's room, we can let ourselves in and learn some of what got him into trouble. He goes on for a time on the nature of the outsider and a place called the Ritual Hold. It seems Malachi, in fact, deciphered the ancient language of the outsider. He was trying to find a name. Using a cipher and the nearby marks on the wall, we can access Malachi's safe to get more background on the language and his efforts to learn it. We then learn it is the actual mark of the outsider that is his name. That is the key. But there's a slight problem. Only spirits in the void, i.e. dead things, can read his name. Pushing toward our objective marker, we can see it leads us to a short dais that will in turn transport us to the Ritual Hold. Here we see a raised platform completely surrounded by broken bits of rock and water. Pushing up to the top, we find that the outsider is waiting for us. In fact, all we see is him alone in the center, unable to move, half-rooted in stone. Here is where we have, as the outsider has said oh so often, a choice. If we walk up to the outsider, we can see he's completely helpless. Nearby, we can also see the spirit of Dowd sitting down, watching his life slowly fade away from him as he seeps into the void. Talking to him, Dowd laments that he is no better than the outsider, stuck here, waiting for others to finish something he started. We remind him of his name and some of his past. He eventually starts to remember us and says there's nothing he can do, only we have the ability to kill him. He urges us forward to end the outsider, ending his own existence of pain. Following through with this request, we can kill the outsider, taking the knife and stabbing him with the outsider unable to do anything to stop us. We lament that this is how it always ends, and the outsider finally breaks from the stone, saying that there are no choices left. We talk with Dowd about how the world will change, and get our tapestry ending. Billy confirms that while we did not fight fair, it did need to happen. We evened the score of all the people the outsider has hurt with his powers. That leaves Billy as just a murderer, and with the outsider gone, the world will change. The void will still be there, and magic will still touch those, but more of its own volition rather than with a dark pseudo-deity. However, if we went to Malachi's room and deciphered the name of the outsider, we can talk with Dowd a little more. We can convince him with the background we learned that there is an alternative to killing the outsider. We can give him his mortality back with his name, but we cannot speak it. Dowd, being dead and a spirit of the void, can. After some back and forth, where we argue that it is better to break the cycle of infinite bloodshed, in the same way that Dowd let us walk away from betraying him, we can give the outsider the same chance. We can forgive him. Dowd reluctantly agrees, calling us better than he ever could have been. He will then walk to the outsider and whisper the name in his ear before being consumed, brought into the void, and the outsider released. The outsider claims we have done the impossible, and we offer to take him out of here. He says that while his eyes were closed all this time, he was still able to see and know what was going on. The outsider is now free. Our tapestry ending here is Billy addressing the outsider that they both cannot take back what the world has done to them, as they were both subject of horrors. They were able, however, to give Dowd peace, as well as the outsider. Alright, well, that's a lot to digest. Let's start with the level design. It's basically a straight line where we U-turn and walk halfway back in the void. The artistic design for this level is fine. The quarry itself isn't the most interesting setting in the world, but the library is really cool, and once we touch the eye, the void is much more interesting. It does feel very short though. This is the buildup of 3 games of hype and mystery around this veritable god. And his level we can run through in maybe 10 minutes if you don't care about stealth. On top of that, there's no target really. The outsider can't fight, and while Dishonored isn't really a boss fight type of game, there isn't much action for this level. It's more like a walking simulator, with 3 rooms of enemies and a few stone guards scattered around. Despite my issues with level design, the story implications of this level vastly outweigh it. For starters, let's talk about the outsider's actions. The outsider wants us to find him. He genuinely wants to die. Throughout the games, he presents a front of a dark eldritch horror, but in actuality, he is trapped. A man thousands of years removed from his age, unable to live a life trapped in the void. He can give out world-altering powers, but can't do anything to help himself. However, the canonical choices of the games have traditionally been the merciful or low chaos options. Assuming this, we can then extrapolate that the Outsider was spared. As we will discuss at length later, the Outsider always assumes the worst, as he is a cynical deity. Billy breaks that cycle by freeing him. The implications of his death or removal are not yet known, but we'll talk about those a little bit later too. This level is honestly a little disappointing. Story-wise, don't get me wrong, absolutely fantastic. But much like the Conservatory, it feels like a way to stretch us going from the bank to the Outsider's side. That's it for the main story. Only 5 missions, as this is a much smaller game. Let's talk second playthrough real quick. Death of the Outsider, like its predecessor, has a New Game Plus mode with some interesting twists. Instead of the previous title, which allowed for the carryover of all upgrades and bone charms, this game mode replaces Billy's abilities with new ones that are unlocked in Mission 2. These abilities are Dark Vision, Blink, and Domino. Again, because there's no runes or bone charms in this game, they come at their full strength from the very beginning. There isn't too much else different here. It is nice seeing Blink make its return. While this place is cool, I think Blink is my favorite movement option of the ones we've had in these games. The levels play out the same, and the difficulty isn't really altered. It's fun, and there's an achievement for completing the game in this mode, but because the game is so short, it isn't too tedious. It's worth playing around in, and if you're like me, Blink is always a welcome sight. Before I start a deep dive about the game, I want to do a slightly shallower dive into one of my favorite stories surrounding the game and how I look at the Outsider. The game director for this game was Harvey Smith, as he was for the previous titles. After the conclusion of Dishonored 2, Hazel Monforton made a series of tweets comparing the Outsider to the Greek idea of, and excuse my pronunciation, I'm no scholar, pharmakos. She got her ideology of the Outsider so on the head that when Smith got wind of her, she was hired on to help work on Death of the Outsider. So let's look at that idea. Because obviously they thought it was good and anything like that should be explored. Pharmakos is, according to the Merriam-Webster dictionary, a person, often already condemned to death, sacrificed in ancient Greece as a means of purification or atonement for a city or community. This makes sense given the story that is told to us by the Outsider in Dishonored 2. He was sacrificed and in that act became the Outsider. Ever since then, he has at least been some part of major events, but not directly intervening. I'm unsure if that is because he cannot or just does not want to. As you play through all the games and you interact with him, he expects you to kill everyone. Then he's surprised when you do things non-lethally. Curious. Hazel's tweets then became a PC Gamer article where she deep dives the Outsider in a way that I have never thought of before. Links to this will of course be in the description down below if you want to read it for yourself. In summary, these are awesome. The Outsider's character is not really directly explored in the game's narrative. Dowd wants him dead because he is a god that meddles and gives people powers that are far too dangerous to be just thrown around. We are given snippets, inklings as to his true power and potential, but never get to see it in full use. We do know that people tied to him have power. Corvo Itano and Emily canonically use theirs to save people. Dowd and Billy are more in the middle of the karmic choices, and Delilah attached herself to the Outsider and, well, we saw how that went. Dowd's assessment that the Outsider needed to die tracks with the thinking of the Greeks that in order for society to live, someone must be sacrificed. And the Outsider has already done it for his people once. This also makes sense as to why he's so pessimistic. He was created because his people killed him, making him a scapegoat for whatever they thought needed to be purified. All he remembers and all he knows is death, destruction, and betrayal. Back to the meta-narrative for now. I was astounded and honestly super happy that a person got to work on a game because they got the character context so on point that the director hired them. That in itself is a story worth telling and really shows the care that was taken into making sure this tied things up nicely for the Kaldwin Outsider arc. This is only a small portion of their analysis, and there's just so much more here with this story that I implore you guys to go look it up. It's one of the coolest rabbit holes I've ever had the pleasure of diving into. Moving on from that fantastic tangent, let's talk about what the story of this game did great and some of the things it did not. Returning to Billy and Dowd is a great choice. They were always characters that existed in parallel to the Kaldwins through Dishonored 1, with some interlinking in Dishonored 2. Dowd himself is a catalyst for the first game's events, and in some ways a capstone as he has the DLC for the first game. Billy is also a character that permeates the story. She's the main character in the Knife of Dunwall DLC, a supporting character in Dishonored 2, and now the mainstay character in this one. Seeing their story brought to the forefront in their own game is a really great idea. I will not pretend to understand all the idiosyncrasies with the Outsider. I'm not a lore expert, nor will I try to be. But what I will say is that the way that this game did it was cinematically and ironically awesome. The entire series, the Outsider is built up as an eldritch god, one who bestows power and then sits back to either watch the world burn with its effects or to gloat with its success. He does not much care which happens, but often seems surprised when people choose to use it for good, as we've discussed earlier. For story's sake, let's assume that Billy and Dowd came around and released him. Either way, the power he wielded and the energy around him is now gone, going on to create rifts between reality and the void. Overall, story is awesome, but some parts were not. I will continually harp on this. Dowd is one of the best characters, and I understand he needed to be dead in order to be there at the end of the game to speak the Outsider's name. But we could have picked a better way to do it, right? It wouldn't have taken much. We can see from when we first pick him up that he's weakened. He's older, more beat up, and his ties to the void are weakening. Maybe while we're in the bank vault, the eyeless attack him. Or when we come back, we see him in the midst of a bunch of clockwork soldiers and a bunch of ruined bodies, him having fended them off, but dying because of it. Doesn't have to be this elaborate cutscene, but at least something to let us see him go. This is main character dying off-screen levels of frustration for me. That's not to say Death of the Outsider is without its highs. It has really high ones, as the other games in the Dishonored franchise have, but I feel like they really blundered the end of Dowd. From a gameplay perspective, starting with 3 unique powers really gives the entirety of the game a sandbox feel. Likewise, the new mana system really helps you fine-tune your abilities by use of skill rather than use of builds. Let's talk again about my favorite level. Breaking into the bank not only allows for a lot of player choice, but also some interesting challenges for the series. The Perfect Crime achievement, which we talked a little bit about earlier, sees us needing to do the bank vault without waking up anybody or touching the security systems. This challenge, coupled with how creative the vault mechanism is, makes this a very fun challenge for the game, and requires an interesting use of abilities. In addition to that, the vault can be completed in much more snatch and grab kind of ways if you choose. Really, this stage is one of the cooler set pieces for the franchise, and I was really happy it was here. That's it for the story and gameplay rants. Because it's such a short game, there's not a whole lot else for us to talk about, so let's wrap up with some achievements and our final thoughts. In this game, there are 30 achievements, highlighting its much shorter nature compared to the others. There's the usual stuff here, some that require us to restrict how we play or to play in specific ways, quest completions, and then challenge-related ones. Let's go over some highlights. Occupational hazard. Inside of Foresight, you can mark targets or go places that you can displace to. Doing this on top of a person? Well, yeah. Great achievement, fun use of the power. The Salute achievement requires us to possess an elite guard and then while walking by a guard of lower rank, have them salute us. Clever planning is another usage achievement. This needs us to displace on top of a target we have marked with Foresight. Fun little utility challenge and a great way to experiment with the 2 new powers. Mightier Than the Sword is interesting. This is half challenge and half, I guess, comedy? There's an upgrade at the black market that lets our wrist dart launcher shoot things that we find around the world. This includes a fountain pen. If we pick up one and shoot it at a guard's head, achievement get. Agent of Mercy is another fun one. Unlike previous games in the franchise, instead of having to beat the entire game with clean hands, we only have to do a singular level. A nice idea as it lends to the sandbox feel. You only have to limit yourself for a single level before being able to do whatever you want. The easy way to do this, and what I did, was to complete the first level without committing any murder, then reload a save near the beginning and play through the game how you would normally. The Shadow achievement is pretty typical for us at this point. It wants us to finish the game without being detected. Basically our ghost playthrough. Because of this game's length, this isn't nearly as bad as some of the other titles. But some missions, notably the last one, have very high enemy density, making some detections feel very random and hard. Overall, its achievements were fun. Creative use of powers, fun challenges, and a small amount of collectibles make this a fun achievement game to play through. Definitely not the hardest in the bunch, and I'd give it about a 6 out of 10 in terms of difficulty, maybe even a 5 out of 10. Let's wrap this up and put it on our list. And with this game, the Dishonored series proper is down. Now, some context. When I set out to do Dishonored, I thought this was going to be a 2-game, quick series. Obviously, I was wrong with both of those points. Dishonored 1 and Dishonored 2 were massive endeavors, and while I'm not upset that it took me a long time to beat them, I was expecting something way shorter. Then I learned that Death of the Outsider was separate and figured, okay, 3 games is not too bad, especially with the third one being really short. And when I got to Dishonored 2's playthrough, I learned something else. I was doing research for the game and came across a little snippet of the fan wiki that said Deathloop on it. A little more digging, and I have learned that Deathloop is in fact in the Dishonored franchise. Alright then. Well, we have finished the Caldwin saga, but we're not quite done with the Dishonored continuity. Before we go, it's time for the chart. Dishonored Death of the Outsider, solid B. It's narratively great, and the story around why some things are in the game is also fantastic, but it's missing a little bit of that Dishonored magic for me. Chaos, while a flawed system in the previous entries, was something I'd come to appreciate and expect. The level design as well, while good, is not up to par with the other games. I think the Vault in Death of the Outsider is the best level by a large margin. I think the fault of Death of the Outsider is the fact that it's stuck somewhere between a full game and a DLC. Because it's a full release, I wanted more than I got, and as a DLC story, it would have been way too big. That's not to say I did not enjoy my time. I really did. And if this had been expanded into a full $60 game, I could see it making into A tier. But the new streamlined systems did not have enough time to shine like the other games had. Again, feel free to disagree in the comments, but for now, that's where it's sitting for me. I had a great time with Dunwall and Karnaca, but it's time to move on to greener pastures. Or at least, pastures on the island of Black Reef. The story is good for what it was. The Outsider was always an interesting character, and dealing with his Lovecraftian D&D style story, finally getting to bring him down is very cool. I don't think I'll ever forgive killing Dowd off screen, but even that isn't the end of the world. Still had a blast and would recommend it. It's also much shorter than the other two. Well, thanks to everyone who got here. I appreciate your time as always watching my videos. If you like what I'm doing, please share with a friend and push all the buttons you think this video deserves. The more people that see this, the more videos that I can end up making. Suggestions and comments are also welcome. The list is ever growing, and it's nice to see what you guys think. Once again, this has been Rednolus. Thanks for watching the list, and I'll see you next episode for Deathloop.